Hi, I want to welcome you. My name is Ricky Paffo. I'm co-chair of the Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition. We're really looking forward to an exciting night. We have many questions already written out, and we'll be looking for some of your questions. There are about 20 volunteers. Oh, and there are people walking around the audience with cards and pencils. If you think you have a question, just raise your hand and they'll come over to you. If you have your question written out and you want to try to get it to the people who review the questions, just raise your hand and they'll come get it. So there are about 20 volunteers from all the groups that have put this together tonight who are working and are in the audience to put this together. And I'm going to pass the speaking to one of those volunteers, Mark Sandine, who is chair of Sustainable Lexington.
Well, thank you. 30 years ago this week, James Hansen testified before the U.S. Congress that climate change was real and an urgent crisis and action was needed. His warning was front page news on all the papers around the world the next morning, but 30 years later, our Congress has taken almost no action to address this crisis. But last night, 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won a stunning landslide primary victory over one of the most powerful members of the U.S. Congress, in part by pledging to institute a Green New Deal similar in scale to the Marshall Plan and to move the U.S. to 100% renewable energy by 2035. Tonight, we are all here to hear our candidates who are running for Jay Kaufman's seat in the Massachusetts House discuss their positions on how fast we need to move to a clean energy economy and protect our environment. The graphic behind you is from the Lexington's Sustainable Action Plan. And our action plan identifies 10 sectors from health to energy to transportation, etc., where we believe action is necessary to respond to climate change. And I would not be surprised if you would have questions and our candidates would be asked to answer questions about all of these topics. But before we get started, I'd like to thank LexGWAC for organizing this event and for many important educational events over the past decade, including having James Hansen come here and speak in Lexington. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to Mothers Up Front and the Sierra Club for their ongoing partnership, for their incredible leadership, for their commitment to taking action on climate, environment, and energy issues, and special thanks tonight to the Sierra Club for agreeing to moderate this forum. So now let me introduce the candidates. The candidates for the 15th Middlesex District seat are Michelle Chicola. Michelle is the vice chair of the Lexington Board of Selectmen. She has a background in local government, including serving as the president of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Matthew Cohen is an instructor at Northeastern University, where he received his PhD in political science. He previously worked as research director for the legislature's Committee on Mental Health and Substance Use, excuse me.
Actually, use is correct. You're right the first time.
Joe Layev is the Director of Asset Management for NewPath. He couldn't be here tonight. It's a Woburn organization that works with members of the community with disabilities. He is a retired Lexington police officer and the former school resource officer for Lexington High School. Marianne Stewart is currently the parent representative on the statewide Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. She's actively involved in the Raise Up Coalition and has served on the Lexington School Committee. William Sweeney has worked on Capitol Hill and Beacon Hill for former Representative Larkin, and for the past 22 years he has worked in the private sector on healthcare technology. Our moderator tonight is Deb Pasternak. Deb is the chapter chair of the Massachusetts Sierra Club, where she serves on their energy committee and also gives activist training to teach citizens like you how to lobby their state reps on clean energy and conservation legislation. Previously, she worked for Furlander, a German wind turbine manufacturer, and previously as a wind farm development consultant. And with that, I will turn the forum over to the capable hands of Deb Pasternak, and we'll get on to hearing their questions and answers from our candidates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to move right into this because we want to get to as many questions as possible. So I'm just going to move right into this. With an escalating series of unprecedented floods and storms each and every year over the past decade, it is increasingly obvious that the climate crisis is accelerating, and our response to this crisis has to accelerate as well. For that reason, tonight we will have 3 rounds of questions, with each round requiring increasingly rapid answers. Our candidates will have 90 seconds to answer the first round of questions, 60 seconds to answer the second round of questions, and 30 seconds to answer the third round of questions. They will each have 2 minutes for their opening and also for their closing statements. Our timers, who I believe are in the front row, oh, there they are, yay. Our timers will hold up a green card that says 15 seconds when you have 15 seconds left to your answer. They will hold up a red card that says stop when your time is ended. Please keep to the allotted time. I'm really not a very confrontational person, but I will be tonight. Before we get started, I want to thank the sponsors of tonight's events on behalf of all the candidates, so you do not need to take time out of your answers to thank the sponsors and attendees. Thank you to the Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition, Sustainable Lexington, the Lexington Green Network, Mothers Out Front, and the Massachusetts Sierra Club. And please do not feel you need to take the full time for each of your answers. If you can answer a question succinctly, that would allow us to get to the many questions that are important to the audience. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start tonight with an opening statement from each of the candidates that have been given to them in advance. And they'll have 2 minutes to respond. And so I'm going to read the opening statement. And the way that tonight's format is going to go is that we have the questions posed to the candidates all in different orders. So I will call your name before you respond, just so it's all in different orders. But for the first question, we'll just be going right down the row as it is, and I'll be reading Joseph Leif's statement that he wrote to present to all of you people. Okay, so here's the question. If you're elected as our state representative, what are the top 3 actions you would take to address climate change? Michelle.
It's great to see so many people here tonight who care about the environment. Addressing climate change and the environment are major priorities of mine. And if you look at my career, you will see a clear track record of environmental achievement. I believe every decision we make must be viewed through the lens of sustainability. The Earth is heating up, and we have to take action now, even when it costs us more and is politically difficult. Throughout my career, I have faced these trade-offs and have always picked what's best for the environment. There are far more than 3 actions I'd take to begin with, but here's a start. First, I'll work for a state budget that spends at least 1% annually on the environment and land preservation. This will allow our state agencies to actually implement the groundbreaking new laws that we hope the legislature is about to pass. Second, with 40% of our carbon emissions coming from transportation, we need a fundamental shift in priorities and policies. To meet our aggressive emissions reduction targets of 80% by 2050, we need seismic changes in the transportation sector by electrifying our trains and vehicle fleet and investing in all modes of transit, including walking and biking. With my vast experience, I can jump right in, pull my friends and colleagues together, and deliver tangible legislation and regulations. Third, we are facing unfortunate changes in the recycling market, so I would set up a task force to develop best practices for reducing waste. We really have to cut down on excessive packaging and educate folks that reducing and reusing should come even before recycling. And we need to develop markets for recyclables and support local industries that use these materials. We've come so far on changing habits and behaviors, we can't afford to go backwards now.
Thank you. And now Matthew.
Thank you all for being here tonight to cover this important topic. I've spent my life studying and working in government, and recently earned a PhD in political science from Northeastern. And I've worked at all levels of government, including over 7 years as a research and budget director at the State House. If I have the honor of being elected, there are many things I hope to accomplish. And this includes in the fields of education, healthcare, senior issues, the economy, and more. But it's all meaningless if we don't have somewhere to live. We need a healthy environment. We're already seeing the dangerous impacts of climate change. Working together, I believe we can address these problems. My first 3 priorities would be, first would be to greatly increase access to alternative energy. We need to lift the cap on net metering, ensure all homes get an energy audit at sale, create incentives for construction of energy efficient buildings, and make it easier for individuals, towns, and cities to build and use alternative energy options. Second, we need to improve public transportation. One way to do so is to make it easier for neighboring towns and cities to raise revenue, to create and operate their own transit systems. Relatedly, we need to build roads that are safer for bikers. Third, we need to foster innovation. We need to support academic and commercial research so that we can become the hub of clean energy, including spending at least 1% of the budget on environmental causes. And I live my life in a way that follows my commitment to the environment. My wife and I have solar panels on our house. We do not directly own stock in any companies that threaten or harm the environment, never have, never will. We compost and grow our own fruits and vegetables, and are financial supporters of environmental action groups. I have a recent proven track record of innovative thinking and success at the State House. I know how to get things done, and I have the courage to stand firm for what we believe in, while effectively working with others to get legislation passed. We need new ideas and new energy. I want to be part of the next generation of leaders who move us forward in our fight to make the world a better place. And I hope this district wants to be a part of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to read Joseph Laev's, the statement that he prepared. Good evening. I'm sorry that I was unable to be with you personally for tonight's forum. 27 years ago today, my wife Kelly and I were married. Long before the scheduling of tonight's event, Kelly had arranged plans for our evening that she cannot change and that I dare not miss. I would like to thank the members of the Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition and the Lexington Green Network for all the great work they do and for hosting this evening. Thanks in large part to the efforts of groups like these, Massachusetts is a leader in policy advancements that have had a positive impact on renewable energy, clean water, land conservation, waste management, recycling, and most importantly, global warming initiatives. But make no mistake, there's a lot of important work to do. As your state representative, I would work hard to introduce innovative environmental regulations and policies to modernize the electrical grid and electrify our public transportation. I will fight to oppose any pipeline expansion, focusing instead on renewable solar and wind initiatives, and I would protect the natural beauty of our state by supporting the establishment of more conservation lands. I believe that the nation continues to need our leadership, and that by introducing more innovative legislation addressing renewable energy, clean water, and support for our natural resources, that we here in Massachusetts will continue to rise to the occasion and provide it. Thank you all for this opportunity and for your consideration on September 4th. I look forward to meeting you in the future and to hearing your thoughts. Okay, and now Marianne, if you could read yours, please.
I'm a Democrat, a progressive Democrat. Protecting our environment is one of my core values. Progressives want to see change. I will act on my values to drive change. The state Senate has passed a remarkable bill for a clean energy future. It's a values-driven document that puts our values front and center across the Commonwealth. It looks at this issue generationally, not 1 or 2 years down the road. They achieved this unanimously because of the large grassroots supports they had and worked with. That's power. One of the most important things to do is have a legislative body that responds to grassroots. This is what I've been doing for years from outside of the State House, and I know how to get stuff done. So one of the first things I would do if I were in the State House would be to work with all of you and other grassroots activists to do everything possible to see this bill passed in the House. Secondly, we need to make certain that Massachusetts has well-defined goals to ensure we are on a path forward to meet our climate change objectives, specifically goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and 2040, and to establish a market-based revenue-neutral carbon tax. Finally, the most important change will be in the way we move to get things done in the House of Representatives. My experience shows that the best policies are crafted both inside and outside of the halls of power when legislators, activists, and people come together to face common needs. I'm uniquely capable of uniting those groups around bold progressive ideas because I have the experience as a grassroots activist. It's that perspective that make me uniquely capable of bringing policy to the people. My proven track record on these issues have brought leading progressive organizations together from across the Commonwealth and in the 15th Middlesex to endorse me as the progressive choice best to continue Jay Kaufman's legacy as a progressive voice for change in this district.
Thanks.
Thank you. And now, William, if you'd read your...
Hi, folks. Thanks for being here tonight. You know, the first thing that we need to do is we need to make changes, and I'm going to advocate for changes at the Department of Public Utilities. As far as I'm concerned, they're in our way when it comes to making meaningful change to help cure climate change in Massachusetts. They've done everything from tell us we can't have smart meters because there's too much cost to it, after giving it a raise to the public utility companies, to saying that and then they authorize demand charges for residential solar customers. Right now, it says all you have to do is have a background in electricity or natural gas to be on the board. We need to change that. I'm going to advocate that we expand the board to 5. We need to have a consumer advocate on the board. We had one in 1997. We don't have one now. And we need to make sure that somebody from the renewable energy market is there and be a part of it. So that's the first thing. Second, we need to really define what distributed energy generation is for Massachusetts. We need to make sure that this is central to the plan and central to the model. Any part of any legislation that I'm a part of, I will absolutely advocate that to have a central role. And the reason is we have to show that decentralizing that old model of control, not only do we get savings from things like not transmitting electricity over wires from great distances and all the loss that we have, but also it brings control back to us. And the key change here for climate change is we bring control back locally, which means we take control away from the fossil fuel companies. Lastly, I'm going to advocate for protecting Massachusetts against the upcoming carbon bubble, which means a lot of jobs are going to be lost because the rest of the world is moving on. China, the EU, they're moving into renewables the way that we should be. We need zero emission buildings, we need solar, we need wind power, we know it, but we need to do it in a way that the markets can adjust. We need to do it in a way that it's going to bring good paying jobs here to Massachusetts, and that's how we're going to address climate change. We're going to absolutely make it clear that this is the right economic choice for the people of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. So I'm going to ask now a 30-second follow-up question to that opening statement, and I'm going to go out of order this time. I'm going to ask William to answer first.
Sure.
How would you rank climate change in your legislative priorities?
I would rank it number 2. I've been very clear that education is number 1. I think it's an investment. I think it informed people. Is
Your microphone is on. The mic is on.
I don't know how to turn the mic back on.
Here. Mic control.
The answer was I would rank it number 2. I've been very clear that education is the number 1 thing that I'm supporting. I think it's an investment, and frankly, I think an educated people would be. The more education we have, it's going to only help us.
Okay, and now Michelle.
I would rank it number 1. If we don't have an earth to live on, we don't have any children to educate. We have no future. I do care deeply about education and other priorities as well, but it has to be the environment that we focus on first. Global warming is not stopping. The climate change is real, and everything we do and every action must address this.
Thank you. And now from Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, as I said in my opening statement, everything is meaningless if we have nowhere to live. So we have to maintain the healthy environment. I actually agree too, though. You can't fully separate education from environment, and I think one thing we need to be doing is educating children much more on how to really get engaged with environmental protection. I still remember being in elementary school and them teaching you, don't run the water while you brush your teeth. Don't waste while you run the dish while you do dishes. So I think you can't separate them fully, but it's got to be up there, yeah.
Okay, and Marianne.
It's one of my top 3 priorities. Public education, expansion, and debt-free college are among the top issues. Energy and the environment, climate change, rapidly moving to renewables, 100% renewables, modernizing the grid, everything that's in the Senate bill, those are key pieces, and followed by social, racial, and economic justice.
Thank you all very much. This begins now our 90-second answer section. So I'm going to start with question number 1, and I'm going to pose it to Marianne first. Would you support the creation of a market-based compliance mechanism for ensuring that the Commonwealth meets its Global Warming Solutions Act targets? This is the Senate's term for carbon pricing, which was recently unanimously approved in the Senate Bill 2545, an act to promote a clean energy future.
I do. The market-based, revenue-neutral carbon pricing is key to achieving our goals for climate change, addressing climate change and the environment.
Thank you. And now William, please.
Yeah, and this will take 90 seconds. Absolutely, I support. I support that initiative.
Thank you. And now Michelle, please.
There's no question I support that. It's vitally important. I would go even a little further. At some point, we might have to make it not just revenue neutral. We have to drive change in this area. And if carbon pricing will help us get there faster, we should use what we can.
Thank you. And now Matthew.
I support this as well, and I actually agree. It doesn't necessarily need to be revenue neutral. I don't think that's the key driver of this, but I think a good market-based solution to climate change makes sense. I do think it important as we plan these out and we keep an eye on how things are going that we make sure that any plan we put into action, and I very much also support this Senate bill. I'm excited that it's passed the Senate. I'm not as hopeful it's going to pass the House, but you never know. Miracles can happen. Let's hope this is one. But we have to make sure that it's both lowering the carbon footprint and protecting people in the lower and middle classes who are living paycheck to paycheck and may not be able to afford to sort of be able to pay for this. So we have to be very careful as we design all this to make sure that we're not harming, putting the costs on the backs of those who can least afford it, but making sure we really are reducing the carbon footprint. So I am excited by what's in the Senate bill. I would have voted yes with no hesitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 2, and this will go to Matthew. Would you support a requirement that utilities report lost and unaccounted for natural gas, that the Commonwealth consider alternatives to natural gas before building new pipelines, and prohibit the imposition of a pipeline tax on ratepayers for funding new pipelines?
Okay, so three parts to that, right? There's the natural gas pipeline, there's the considering alternatives first, and the pipeline tax. So in terms of the pipeline, I do not feel that we need additional pipelines. That is not the direction we should be going. We should be looking at funding alternative energy. We should be looking for new, innovative things that are going to make us the world leader in alternative energy. The pipelines are not the way to go, and I do believe they should have to report when that gas is lost. I do believe it's important to keep track of, are they meeting their own responsibilities to fight climate change? And if they're just letting gas leak into our water, leak into the atmosphere, well, that's very damaging, and they should certainly be held accountable for that. We should always consider the alternatives first, and I do not support any sort of increase on consumers, including a pipeline tax. Consumers should not have to pay for the gas that is lost by these companies, oil or gas that is lost by these companies. So, yes.
Thank you. And next, Michelle, please.
The natural gas that's lost into the atmosphere is very, very damaging. That methane is something that we need to stop, and stop as rapidly as we can. So yes, we need to have a requirement that it's reported, and we should not allow those costs to be passed on to the consumer. I was very pleased as chair of the legislative committee of MAPC when we were very active on this issue. The staff at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council did a fair amount of mapping of the natural gas leaks, and this community in particular in Lexington also sponsored some incredible forums to daylight the issue of the natural gas leaks. I don't support expanding pipelines, and I would vote against any new expansion and agree to a tax if there was an expansion for that pipeline.
Okay, thank you. And William, please.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, in fact, what needs to happen is these pipelines need to be metered in a way that there can be very accurate reporting of the amount of fuel that's moving through them. I can only imagine how much loss is occurring that's being unreported. You know, secondly, you know, I'm not for the expansion of the pipelines, and I'll just tell you why. My interpretation of what's happening is that, you know, we're sort of potentially becoming a port for fossil fuel export. I don't agree with Massachusetts playing a role like that. I disagree that the intention of the pipeline is to bring more natural gas here to keep energy costs down. I think that's a straw dog. So I don't support the creation of new pipeline, and if we were going to tax them, I would suggest that we tax them in such a way that they weren't a viable alternative and we not become a fossil fuel export port here in Massachusetts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Mary Ann?
All of those provisions are provided for in the Senate bill, and utilities, the fact that utilities need to report lost and unaccounted for natural gas leaks, and it prohibits imposing a pipeline tax on ratepayers for funding new pipelines. It also requires that the Commonwealth consider alternatives to natural gas before any kind of new pipelines or expansion of pipelines, and it gives new authority to local authorities in the approval of compressor stations, establishing requirements for air monitoring near existing compressor stations as well.
Thank you very much. This next question is going to again be directed to Matthew. The utility business model currently rewards the Commonwealth's utilities for building fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines and natural gas power plants, and discourages the integration of solar and other renewables into our grid. Would you support actions to align the utility business model with the public interest?
Absolutely. I mean, easy to answer in that regard. It makes no sense how we have everything set up right now. We are rewarding people for killing the environment. It is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. There are lots of innovative projects taking place right now across Massachusetts, from leading schools, UMass, Harvard, MIT. They're all constructing buildings. They're creating new ways to get energy where it needs to go from place to place with zero sort of carbon footprint left. This is what we should be funding. We should be pushing these utility companies. We need to fix net metering so that there is this real incentive now to make sure that people who choose to use solar power are able to be rewarded for doing so. And this goes beyond, we have to look beyond just residential setups, beyond just homeowners. There's a big issue around apartment buildings. And if people in apartment buildings, they don't get the same benefits homeowners do, we need to make sure that businesses have incentives to be pushing the companies that provide energy to them are providing clean energy. We need to be working with contractors to make it more profitable to be really building sort of new and clean buildings. So we have it all backwards right now.
Thank you. Next, please, Mary Ann.
We need to keep fossil fuels in the ground and move to renewable energy, 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible. I think we're doing pretty well on solar in the state. We need to provide safe, reliable power for everyone. It's important for medically fragile populations, and we need to spread the costs and benefits to all. I think there's a disincentive in the current business model, especially around battery technology. And innovation is our edge here in Massachusetts. So the owners of large houses who install solar are the ones who can best afford it, and they don't need to invest in battery storage right away. They can just send the power back to the grid and expect the power to be there when they want it at night. I'm concerned also about the costs. The cost savings are accruing to the most wealthy homeowners, while the cost of subsidy is being taken up by taxpayers. So more and more solar on roofs, which means those with the largest roofs and ability to put up thousands in initial capital get return on investment in just a few years, while the rest of us continue to pay among the highest rates for electricity in the country.
And William, please.
Folks, if I think we're going to do anything about economically aligning and the current broken system, it sort of gets back to what I was talking about in my opening statement about one of the key things that we need to do. We need to start thinking about things in terms of distributed energy generation, right? And that means that we need to make sure that folks are able to produce energy, we can put it back on the grid, but it also means that we need to keep it at the core of what we're doing. The Senate did a really interesting thing by taking all the different proposals and kind of pulling them together in one omnibus bill. And it's to be lauded in the sense that it's a determined statement, it's a definitive action that the folks who signed on and wanted to vote for it support the environment. But what I believe needs to happen, especially because I happen to be one of those folks that just believes money makes the world go round, and economics are what are going to be one of the things that really turns the trick here. I think the economic incentive alignment and the change that needs to happen is very much more focus on smaller distributed power generation, so that we can take the control away from the centralized power generators at the Department of Public Utilities that needs to look at the energy distribution in terms of how can I get more hydro down from Canada, which is, I don't think, anything that we want, right? So anyway, that's how I would look at and think about realigning the economic incentives with respect to how we're transmitting and generating energy.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
So I'm going to agree with a couple of my colleagues here. We do need to align the economic interests with the public interest. That's first and foremost, and all of our incentives should be designed to help people, especially in particular at the low and moderate income levels. And it is true that the current incentive program does favor the wealthy who can afford to put up these expensive solar systems. But I will also agree that we need to reform DPU, and the private utilities have far too much power on Beacon Hill. That may also require us to do some reform of campaign finance and other measures in the state, because right now their voice is being heard too loud and clear, and we need the public's interest to be the loudest voice.
Thank you very much. So this next question, number 4, is going to be directed to Michelle first. Would you support legislation to encourage solar energy, including eliminating net metering caps and unprecedented residential demand charges on solar customers, and restoring net metering rates for low-income and community solar customers?
Absolutely. This is a really important issue, because what's the demand charges that were proposed and recently, I believe, removed in the Senate bill are making the current systems that people have put on their house uneconomical and turning upside down the incentive programs. So we absolutely need to remove the net metering cap, and we need to remove those demand charges. And there was a third part of the question.
Restoring retail net metering for low-income and community solar.
Yes, exactly. The retail net metering allows community solar systems to be built as well, and that's an important thing that we need to restore.
Okay, thank you. And Marianne, please.
Again, these are components of the Senate bill, which if I were in the House, I would work like crazy to get this bill passed, because it's an amazing, remarkable achievement. It passed with unanimous bipartisan support, and it is something that I think we can all get behind, because it is a values-driven document. It eliminates net metering caps, it eliminates the Eversource residential demand charges for solar customers, restores full net metering for low-income and community solar, allows net metering credits to transfer across load zones, all with the goal of providing fair and equitable access to solar for all Massachusetts residents. It creates a working group to study requiring solar installations on all new buildings. So, yeah.
Thank you. And William, please.
Well, there's not much more I can say, right? I concur with the other folks that are here. I would, and wholeheartedly, but would only further the point to say that that's one of the reasons I was very clear that we need to make changes at the Department of Public Utilities. A lot of the things that we're talking about here today have been shot down there. We need to get consumer advocates there. We need to get folks that from the renewables industry there on the board, because a lot of the things that are moving forward are going to require some partnership with industry. Right now it's not partnership, it's adversarial, and we need to fix that. Thanks.
Thank you. And Matthew.
I mean, I would be in agreement with all of this as well. You know, net metering and fixing these rates, eliminating the cap, is key to all this. And you know, the Department of Public Utilities got rid of a lot of the optimal time of use rates. They've been favoring the energy companies, and we need some real reform to be taking place there. So, you know, we need to expand the use of net metering, time of use options. We need to look at innovative ways for technology to make sure that we can really keep track of this net metering. Right now, if we tried to implement this, most say it won't work because we don't have adequate technology to be able to really keep track of this. So we really need to focus on being able to develop the technology that we need. Innovation, you know, you're gonna hear me say it a lot tonight, but it's gonna be the key. Over and over again to all of this is innovation. And you know, I too am thrilled that the Senate bill has been moving forward. I was talking with one of my former bosses up at the State House about this bill today, and she was telling me that the real goal here was to take steps forward. And so I think we need to be looking, not just at that bill, but at things like, I know there's at least two others I can think of, House 1747 and House, I think it's 2712. Both involve net metering, for example. We need to be looking at all of these different steps we can take forward, and then hope that, and work as hard as we can to get that Senate bill passed.
Thank you. So this will be our last 90-second answer question, and this one is directed to William. Massachusetts has set a target of putting 300,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025, or about 12% of the registered vehicles in Massachusetts. Are we doing enough to support that initiative? What steps would you take to promote electric vehicle adoption in Massachusetts?
I'm not sure that we are doing enough. And you're going to get maybe sick of me hearing it, but we need to have local energy generation. One of the technology problems that goes along with that is storage. And there are some very interesting and innovative ideas where the battery storage in a vehicle can actually be used to handle some of the overflow. It can actually be used to reduce some of the complaints of the fossil fuel generators that throw electricity onto the grid. So. No, we're not doing enough. We need to have a comprehensive plan. The plan needs to include ideas like how can we leverage the batteries that we already have, and how can we promote the local energy generation. We're a net importer of energy, and that's something that needs to change.
Okay, and next would be Michelle.
So one of the keys to having electric vehicles widely adopted will be to have adequate charging stations. And one of the things I think we absolutely need to do is require large-scale construction to install charging stations automatically as part of the building code. So I would advocate to update the building code to allow that to happen, and increase the incentives we're currently providing to encourage employers to install them in existing facilities. Right now there are incentives in place, but we could use those incentives to be expanded so people begin putting charging stations everywhere. And we could also increase the incentives to residents who purchase an electric vehicle. This is one of the most important things we need to do because of the transportation sector taking up so much of the providing so much of the greenhouse gas emissions at 40%. So anything we can do for the transportation sector is going to be incredibly important.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
We absolutely need to do more to encourage electric and clean vehicles on the road. We're not doing nearly enough. We need to encourage the building of rapid recharge stations, battery swap locations. We need to do, a lot of this, by the way, is in this Senate bill, this omnibus bill, again, which is why we all got to work as hard as we can to get it passed. But things like establish corridors for where exactly are the biggest need for these types of charging stations, so that there's never a risk you run out while you're driving. We need monetary and non-monetary incentives, which can include things like additional tax credits, vehicle or infrastructure rebates or vouchers, vehicle registration fee reductions, loans, special low-cost charging rates for electricity that you use to power a car, rebates for the purchase of these types of vehicles. I know, for example, there's the Massachusetts offers rebates for electric vehicles. It's more EV, so I think I got that right. They offer rebates, I think, of $2,500 for the purchase of a zero-emission and plugged-in hybrid sort of light-duty vehicles. We need to expand programs like this so more and more people can have access to these types of vehicles.
Thank you. And Marianne, please.
I thought it was really fun that Fast Company said something like, we think of Tesla as a car company, but we should really be thinking about it as a battery storage company. So the technology for batteries that is being used for vehicles is key, but it's kind of a small step. I think there's a lot more we could do. It's simple, it's not easy, but it is smaller than some of the bigger, bolder goals that we have. So all of the things that are have been suggested are part of that plan, and I would work as hard as possible to see that we're all engaged in that process and to bring that fact to our future.
Thank you. Wow, you guys are doing great. So now we're going to start our 60-second answer part of the evening. I'm going to start a question about trees, and it's a two-part question. It's directed towards Michelle. Trees and forests produce 25% of the oxygen we breathe and are one of the few effective ways we can reduce the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. 1, what actions would you take to help us protect our trees and forests in Massachusetts? And 2, should Massachusetts count turning wood pellets, burning wood pellets, as a renewable energy?
Such a great question. I don't think the jury is out on the wood pellet question yet. It's something I'm researching further. It has some potential, but I'm not convinced it's the right way to go because I don't want to incentivize more tree removal. One of the things that we need to do in Massachusetts, there's several things, but we need to encourage smart growth and sustainable development so that we are reducing the removal of forest for new construction. We need to concentrate new construction where we already have infrastructure and in redeveloped areas instead of taking down raw forests. We also need to increase the fee at the Registry of Deeds to recapitalize the Community Preservation Act. The CPA is one of the major sources of funding for land preservation in Massachusetts, and it's vitally important for the communities that use it to do land conservation, and that will help protect and save forests as well.
Thank you. And now Matthew, please.
So it's vital that we protect the forests. And I too think it's critical that we protect conservation land, that we not allow it to be torn down, that we maintain these open spaces. We have to strengthen the Community Preservation Act. There's actually a piece of legislation, I'm forgetting the House number now, it's sponsored by Senator Eldridge and Representative Balzer, that would do just that. And I would be a strong proponent of such legislation. As for the wood pellets, so I know that Vermont has just begun a program where they're offering people incentives and I think it's discounts in order to install sort of giant wood pellet burning stoves to heat their houses, with the idea that it will create jobs and with the idea that you'll be able to reduce your carbon footprint. I've not seen all the evidence on it, but it's a good sign that Vermont is doing it. So I would be inclined at the moment, at least, to support that.
Okay, thank you. And Marianne.
One of the reasons my husband and I chose to move to Lexington was because of the commitment to conservation and the dedication by so many to preserve our environment. I haven't looked into the pellet question, so I don't know how to answer that. What I want to say, though, is it's not only the forests that we should be protecting, it's also just tree canopy in general. I mean, we look around Lexington and consider how leafy and green it is here, and there are parts of the city, and you don't have to go very far, and other communities where that is not the case. And so, yes, the trees create oxygen, but they also suck up a lot of carbon dioxide. So this is really important, and I think that it provides shade. Having more tree canopy provides shade. It enables more walking and biking and just a more pleasant situation for getting around.
Thank you. And William, please.
Sure, so I'll talk about the wood pellet stoves first. So my understanding of it, along with a similar kind of issue, can you use propane for a small local generator so that if you are trying to be somebody who's sort of off-grid, you can have an energy option, and is being off-grid and wresting control from the centralized power creators, is that so laudable and create such a difference that it makes sense to be able to have the ability to do that. So I think there's some merit to it. I don't know that's something we want to invest in or give tax credits for, but I sort of understand it. I went to the University of Massachusetts, and it was funny. There were always questions about how they were going to do reforestation of certain tracts of land out there, because there's logging and timbering that happens there. So I guess the answer to that question is I've been aware of this since I went to college, and I would say we should embark in a reforestation measure here in Massachusetts. It makes total sense. That's the cleanest and best way to get rid of carbon.
Thank you. This next question is going to be directed towards Marianne. What specific concerns do you have about the recent rejection of recyclables from China and how it might relate to the state's mandate for recycling? Would you support a statewide ban of single-use plastic?
I would support that. We supported that in Lexington at our recent annual town meeting. But I would go a little further here and just, or maybe scale it back a little bit, because not everything that we need to do requires state legislative action. We can look locally for initiatives. For example, composting. We've had an opportunity to consider anaerobic digestion a year or two back, and we turned it down. There's been recent conversation on the Lexington list about pay-as-you-throw. Do we think it's time for that? If so, we need to change the bylaw. And Lexington's Net Zero Task Force has a vision for a 25-year goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from Lexington's residential, municipal, and commercial buildings, and to achieve a transition to renewable energy sources. But the task force's recommendations have not been acted upon by the Board of Selectmen. And further, we have nearly $500 million in capital projects over the next decade, and we don't have an updated sustainable design policy. So I could say more about this, and maybe we'll get to the questions about that too.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
I'm very concerned about making sure that we recycle appropriately. There's actually very poor data, even in Massachusetts, on what is recycled and how good we are at doing it. So we need to get better at figuring that out as one of our major steps. In terms of the plastic bag ban, as I would agree in part, there are a lot of local communities engaging on this issue, and I'm pleased that Lexington took the steps that it did. I think we obviously need to proceed in an intelligent manner, make sure that we're always working with people like the people in this room, so that we're really getting at the issue in all of these steps. So, one thing we might want to consider with all this too, in the recycling and sort of plastic use, is something called, I think it's extended producer responsibility. The idea that sort of that people who manufacture sort of harmful products are going to be responsible for taking care of those products toward the end of that life cycle. So it builds in a cost for that manufacturer. So it's not simply that the cost is passed on to us and that we have to bear that brunt.
Thank you very much. Michelle, please.
So should we ban single-use plastic as a state? Absolutely. I heard just single-use plastic. So I would say yes on the bags, but I think we need to go even further and ban the water bottles, the single-use water bottles. Those do not degrade properly. They cannot be recycled, and they're terrible for the environment. So I'm hoping that Lexington's town meeting will take that up next, and the legislature at the state level will follow. But it's clear that the plastic bags in particular are polluting the waste stream, and that's one of the things that makes the recycling very complicated when we do single stream recycling. So we need to continue to educate our residents so that our recycling is not being contaminated. But I'll also go back to the fact that DEP is terribly underfunded. We do not have enough data, and we do not have enough support to enforce our existing regulations to make sure recycling is done properly. So I am hoping that with better funding for DEP, we can do a better job at statewide recycling in general.
Thank you. And William, please.
Yes, absolutely. I worked for a couple of companies. This was from 2 companies ago, where we gave out canteens for everybody, because we face it in the company. We face it at my home. If you've been to any of these other events, you've seen me bring my canteen around, and it's just going to become a way of life. Does that mean that we should ban it at the state level? Yeah, it does, right? I mean, you guys are probably starting to get realizing that I have formed an opinion of the fossil fuel industry. All of that plastic is just another form. It's a spun out form of the byproduct of creating fuel. So it's just another way that we're sort of putting economics, putting money into the pockets of that industry. So yes, let's ban it. Let's go further. There's styrofoam. There's other materials that we also need to address. And drinking water out of a bottle just isn't good for you. Thanks.
Thank you. So I want to encourage the audience, if you have questions, please fill out your cards, because it looks like we'll have some time to get to them. Okay, moving on. This is question 9, and this is directed to William. and I think that you're going to like this one.
Great.
Fossil
fuels?
An MIT study found that the particulate matter created from burning fossil fuels accounts for over 5,000 premature deaths in Massachusetts. The study also found that Boston was third worst metropolitan area in the country for this, largely due to our dependence on burning oil to heat our homes. What would you do to encourage the transition to cleaner heating systems in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I'm glad I get to start with this one because I get to say one of my favorite terms, right? Distributed energy generation. Folks, it's just, it's a different way. I mean, again, I love the Senate bill. We took a lot of disparate ideas, we pulled them together and into a bill, but we need to start pulling the ideas together into a plan, right? And so the plan needs to be, how are we going to create energy locally here in Massachusetts with local control, and frankly, the people who are generating, so we know the folks who are generating the energy. So when it comes to the point of the question about particulate matter and the rest, it's deadly. And it's made worse because when the particulate, it gets deeper into your lungs, so therefore it causes more chronic problems. The increase in the rate of asthma, which was probably a part of the study I haven't read yet, it is all part of it. So for me, again, it becomes let's wrest the power away from the centralized power companies, the fossil fuel companies. Let's bring it locally. I think it is also in keeping with my other views about workplace democracy and other ways that we need to bring power back to the people, back to the local folks. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, please.
So particulate matter is a very, very serious issue. It's not only a serious issue from our home heating oil, but also along our highway corridors. That's one of the reasons why when the New Hastings Schools was being designed, I advocated to make sure that we upgraded the air filtration in that school to protect our children and our teachers. So in order to convert our residential sector over, we need to provide incentives for residents to convert their homes to air and ground source heat pumps. In particular, that's one thing that can be done with clean energy when we clean up the grid and those that also are able to put solar. If the electricity is clean and we're using air and ground source heat pumps, then we're going to not be burning fossil fuels and using oil. So finding ways to incentivize those home conversions is the next step. It is expensive, and so we're going to need to subsidize and support that, especially for low and moderate income residents.
Thank you very much. Matthew, please.
It's another great question, and I think a key to this again is going to be innovation, but we need improved technology. We need ways for people to store the energy that they produce, and by the way, to allow them to really store the energy that they produce. This will decrease their dependence on these fossil fuels. We need rebates for energy efficiency so that people at home can buy products that are more energy efficient, which will be a benefit to them and the Commonwealth in the long run. When a house is sold, we should have mandatory energy audits to make sure that houses are being sort of transferred in the most efficient way possible, and new owners will know exactly where the problems lie. We should increase the renewable portfolio standard so that sort of companies are required to continuously produce more and more of the electricity they provide to us from renewable sources. And we'll come back again to net metering. We need to make sure that we lift that cap on net metering so that people have all the incentive in the world to be switching to solar and alternative energy.
Thank you. And Marianne, please.
So while we're planning to move forward into a clean energy future, there are going to be interim steps that we need to take. I don't know exactly what they are, but I'm very interested in engaging with activists and my networks outside of the State House and across the state, and getting to know the folks in the State House and developing a plan, prioritizing a plan for moving forward. We do need to support, expand, and improve efforts that protect people, especially fragile individuals, children and elders, from toxic exposures that cause preventable illness and disabilities. And also the indoor air quality is a really key point for all of that. So to improve efforts to maintain and modernize all of our facilities.
Thank you. This next question is going to be directed to Marianne again. After the flooding from the March storms, do you think that Massachusetts is ready to deal with the impacts of climate change? What actions would you propose the Commonwealth take to help communities adapt to the impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise, flooding, and power outages?
So climate science is real. We need action to address this issue. Rising seas, blizzard weather, a climate denier in the White House. We're not going to get any help from the federal government at this time. And we know it's time for Massachusetts to act on climate change. I thought it was interesting that after New York experienced Superstorm Sandy back in 6 years ago, within a year they had created post-disaster interim housing for folks who are located on all of the shores along the whole coast line in New York. And they put it out as a kind of a challenge for anybody in the state to suggest a way to provide interim steps for housing. And you can go online, I forget where it is exactly, but you can probably find it through Google, but they actually have these beautiful plans, all different kinds of plans for interim housing. I think housing is a big piece, but absolutely working together with individuals to create and prioritize how we would move forward.
Thank you. William, please.
So here in Massachusetts, right, we talked about some of the things that need to happen, right? The net metering cap coming off and the rest of it. But you know, for this one, I'm going to look to Vermont. They have an excellent example. I can't remember the name of the program. I wish that I could. But basically the program worked like this. You were encouraged to get off the grid. You were provided with one of the Tesla home batteries, and you were charged something like $30 or $40 a month for its maintenance, and then they did it as a demonstration project. And it got to the point now, the last piece that I read about it, they were able to bring, I think they brought the monthly cost down to somewhere under $20, $15 or $18, something like that for that battery rental. And then because it became an alternative, it was part of the, I think it was in the same context where I was reading about is it that or a wood burning stove or other ways to kind of stay off the grid. So we just need to do more. So are we ready? No. What's the answer? We need to create opportunities for people to be able to generate electricity themselves, and that's part of the key ingredient for Massachusetts to stop being a net energy importer, but rather be self-sustainable.
Thank you. Michelle, please.
So this is a real difficult question, obviously, with flooding going on and sea level rising. Communities along the coast are particularly hard hit, but we shouldn't expect that communities inland are not also going to be hit. With massive storms surging, we will have culverts that are going to need to be replaced. We will have bridges washing out and rivers flooding, even in the interior of the Commonwealth. So climate adaptation planning becomes vitally important, something I've been involved with for a long time with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, with the region, and with cities and towns. Those cities and towns in those states that are not doing enough planning are actually going to see their bond ratings start to drop because it gets more expensive to maintain infrastructure and to upgrade infrastructure when done after a disaster. So these plans need to be incremental, they need to be funded very robustly, and we're going to need to make sure we understand it's something that we prioritize on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
We are not ready, and actually part of my academic research is on resiliency, so it's a topic near and dear to my heart. But one thing we need is redundant systems. We can't just have one system that does this, so when it fails, we need something else to back it up. And we need to take into account that there are some populations that are more vulnerable than others. We need to focus our energy on those populations and making sure they work. But there are one program and executive order that are particularly relevant here. One is the Municipal Vulnerability and Preparedness Program. It's through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And it's a fairly new program, helps communities conduct vulnerability assessments and set priorities for adaptation and resiliency. And in its first year, provided grants to 66 communities to prepare for just this kind of thing. And there's also Executive Order 569, which actually calls to address this exact issue. And we need to fully fund, fully implement these programs and these types of steps if we're going to be at all able to be ready and be resilient.
Thank you very much. I feel like I'm delivering a quiz. I'm sorry. They're written for me. Okay, this is question 11, and this is for Michelle. And this one has a lot of policy language in it. Buildings are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. What actions would you propose to reduce emissions from our buildings? Please let us know your thoughts on the role of solar, net zero, and stretch building codes, and requirements to disclose building energy use. Michelle, please.
So read it one more time, please.
Okay, I know, it's got a lot of policy, okay. Buildings are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. What actions would you propose to reduce emissions from our buildings? Please let us know your thoughts on the role of solar, net zero and stretch building codes, and requirements to disclose building energy use.
So starting with the last part first, I voted in favor of disclosing energy use as part of the, as chair of legislative committee for MAPC, and recommended that that become the policy of that agency as well. People need to know when they're buying a new home exactly how much energy it consumes, and that's vitally important. Stretch building code does not go far enough. We are beyond that, I think, and need to actually have a more rigorous building code than the stretch building code, but at least that is a start. All houses should, ultimately new houses should be encouraged to design for net zero, and I know that as selectmen we've been encouraging all our new school buildings to be net zero ready in Lexington as part of preparing for the future. Solar is a piece of the puzzle that whenever possible should be used on every building. And in 15 seconds left, we need to make our buildings more energy efficient by doing audits, increasing insulation, improving the windows, and doing window replacement as necessary, converting old heating systems over, and that's all the time I have.
Thank you. Matthew, please.
There's a lot to answer in that one. So, yeah, right. So, I've been a big proponent of solar this entire debate. I continue to be a big proponent of solar. I think we need to eliminate again the net metering. We need to get rid of that cap. We need to create incentives for contractors to be going to net zero, for the companies that hire contractors. Well, they might need some incentive. Well, I think we've seen that they need incentives in order to push them in the right direction. So we need to work across all these different ways. I'm definitely in favor of requiring people to disclose energy use. Actually, as it turns out, for every dollar you invest in energy efficiency, businesses reap, I think it's $4.27. So we have to explain to them too that this is beneficial for you to engage in this, and we should be encouraging everybody to be stretching toward net zero. And I hope I answered all the components of that question. So, okay.
Thank you, and William, please.
Sure, so I forgot to bring a pen tonight, so I guarantee you I'm going to miss a few of these, but I'll just jump right into the one I know the most, and and there's an angel among us. Thank you very much. But seriously, I became first most acquainted with how to properly go forward with our new building codes when I started to become aware of net zero building. That it's been proven. We have many communities that are moving forward with it, ours, Amherst, and others, and I think that needs to be the focus. When it comes to disclosure on how much energy that a home is projected to be using, that has to be a component, because at the end of the day, for the same reason that we don't have smart meters, that we can't get the right data, we need good information if we're going to be able to move forward, because it's not, none of this is easy. There's going to be a lot of decisions to make. We can't do it all at once. And I think one of the keys that we have to remember is that we're going to have to evolve our way through this process. We need good information to do that, and there's a good example of information that we need. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Marianne, please.
This is an example of, like you were saying, is you feel like you're delivering a quiz. I think most of you have fantastic answers. You've probably thought a lot about a lot of these issues, more than I have. And this is the kind of situation where I'm going to need to rely on all of you as activists, as experts, as scientists, to approach this project and these policy decisions with collaboration from people outside of the State House and inside of the State House. This is a people-powered campaign. It's going to continue to be a people-powered campaign because those are the best policies. They come to, we get the best policy when everybody when you hear from everyone and you can just make decisions based on the facts. And that's what I'll do when we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is directed towards Matthew. Can I ask it yet, or it's at 12? Okay. Ooh, lots of new questions. Great. So this next question is directed at Matthew first, And this is the last question of our 60-second section, so get ready to think faster. But anyway, so, we're ending it with a little bit of urgency here. Climate scientists are continually lowering the time we have to avoid drastic climate change impacts. Do you support the goal of transitioning to a 100% renewable energy economy? If so, what actions would you support for a rapid mobilization towards that goal?
Absolutely, yes. We should be doing that. There was a Global Warming Solutions Act which called for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels by 80% by 2050. That's not enough, and it's not soon enough. We have to be realistic in what we can accomplish. We are not going to achieve 100% renewable energy tomorrow. That would be wonderful, but we're not going to do it. So I think we need to adhere closely to what the Senate bill has done. I think we need to focus, here comes that word again, on innovation. I think we need to look at how do we develop these new technologies as fast as we possibly can. To me, that is the core of how you get to 100% renewable energy, is incentives for innovation and incentives for, beyond that, businesses and individuals to be implementing those technologies in their own homes. We need to make it cost affordable for everybody, from rich to poor. We need to make sure that we are funding the budget adequately, at least 1% towards the environment. So innovation and new technology.
Thank you. Oops, sorry, I went to the next page. Marianne, please.
So I'll be repeating several things as well. It's really keeping fossil fuels in the ground, grid modernization, accelerating renewables, and quickly transitioning to 100% renewable energy. The Senate bill, of course, moves this timeline out just a little bit, but brings it in so that we are achieving our goal beyond the Global Warming Solutions Act before 2050. So there are goals along the way, 2030, 2040, and if we stay on track with those benchmarks, we should be able to reach the goals as we anticipate by before 2050.
Great, thank you. And William, please.
Sure, so I guess the first part is 100% renewable energy economy the goal? I think it's absolutely the policy goal. And I think the second part was, so if there's if the climate scientists are moving that needle closer, what would you do about it? How are we going to get there faster? All I can really say to that is we have to do sort of all of the things that we've been talking about here tonight, but there's a couple of key things that we need to do. We really need to make sure that the fossil fuel industry needs to be not treated with government regulation the way it is today. There's too much advantage that's being given on the playing field for them. And you've heard me talk about the Department of Public Utilities, the centralization of the power. That's really what it comes down to. We have to, if you think we need to break up the banks, folks, I think ExxonMobil's big, and we need to break up the companies like that. If we really wanted to take it on, that's what you'd have to do.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
So it's been a while, but the articles that I've read about wind power suggest that we could supply more than 3 times the region's needs if we fully build out the capacity and opportunity we have to do wind power. And so one of the things I think we need to do, and I do agree we need to transition to 100% renewable power as rapidly as possible. But one of the things that I think we need to do is increase the renewable portfolio standards above those that are being required in the new Senate bill. I think it's only 3% increase, and I think we need to go much more aggressively at requiring utility companies to provide more renewable power on a faster pace. So increasing their targets and their requirements is a major piece, and investing in wind specifically because we have it readily available and in close proximity to New England. And then I think we need to collaborate with our regional states, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I'm going to get that wrong. The RGGI compact needs to also be strengthened, and so that may require our state to collaborate with other states in New England to advance that.
Okay, thank you. So apparently, because you guys have been doing such a great job of answering all the questions, we're actually not going to winnow it down to 30 seconds. You still have 60 seconds for the next round. So, yay. Okay, so moving along. This is directed to Michelle. What steps would you take to support public transportation in Lexington and Woburn? What is your opinion on raising the gas tax? And if so, by how much?
So we need to do a number of things to improve transit in Lexington and in Woburn. One of the things we did here in Lexington was to create the REV shuttle, which is funded by private businesses and also the community, and that's been highly successful. But it doesn't have good legislation to support its ongoing finances, and it's something I've been working on personally to make sure there's a sustainable funding source for that particular program. I do support the gas tax. In 2013, when I was president of MAPC, we issued an entire white paper about additional revenue sources that we need to use in the transportation sector in order to be able to invest more heavily in regional transportation. And I don't recall exactly what the compromise amount was in terms of the number of cents of increase, but we need to revisit that and make sure that we do advance a gas tax, because that's one of the measures that we can use for new revenue to invest in transportation. The transit betterment is the other thing that I would advance for the corridors that I was just discussing with the REV, and I'm out of time, so.
Thank you. Mary Ann, please.
Our transportation infrastructure is critical to economic growth, and I think if we have a clear set of objectives of where we need to go with regard to our reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and 2040, et cetera, then we will be able to speak much more clearly on this, obviously. But the transportation, you can't, if you work in Woburn and you live in Lexington, you can't get there on a, by the T or MBTA. You have to take your car, or maybe you're going to bike from one end of Lexington to the other end of Woburn, which has been done. But the transportation infrastructure is not just about economic growth. It's deeply connected to affordable housing and our climate change goals, our energy goals. And the question is, do we want good public transportation, or do we want to sit in traffic? And how much work flexibility are we going to have as well? There's a lot of parts to this question.
Thank you. And William, please.
Sure. So we're going to put Lexington and Woburn right on the new electric bus line that's going to take us to West Station so we can get into Boston. That's what needs to happen. We need to fix transportation that way with that sort of lofty of an idea. That's what needs to occur. When it comes to the gas tax can go up. I'm not sure that I would increase it in a vacuum, but as we move forward with curing our transportation ills, which clearly need to be done with borrowing, that's the only way that we're going to get there, and we create the new transportation system in a way that is environmentally viable, which is what I just tried to paint a picture of for you folks, then I think we give, when there's different options for folks, absolutely, it's time for the gas tax to go up.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
I want to see an expansion of MBTA service. It is true, if you want to get from town to town in Massachusetts, the MBTA is sadly too often not your best bet. So we need more routes, we need improved service, that way more people will ride it. I do not want to see the price of the T go up, that will discourage people from riding it, and will harm people really who can't afford it and the environment. We need to expand things like the last mile program, so that people can get from, who are elderly or disabled, can get from the MBTA stop to their house. It will encourage them to use the MBTA. So I think that's critical, and I'm all for the electric vehicles there as well. As I said in my opening too, I think a good idea is allowing local communities like Lexington and Woburn to develop their own sort of joint transportation system so they can make that work well between them. As for the gas tax, I am in favor of raising the gas tax, as you said though, not necessarily in a vacuum. I think we need to do it in conjunction with other things, and as for the exact amount, well, I'd like to work with all of you to figure out exactly what that amount should be.
Thank you. This next question is going to be directed to William. To ensure that Massachusetts continues to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, would you support increasing our regional and local renewable energy generation by increasing the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, by 3% or more?
Yes, I absolutely would. My understanding is that it has been increased, and 3% doesn't sound like enough, and we should increase it absolutely by much more.
Oh, Michelle, and I just want to clarify, it's 3% annually.
Annually,
Yep.
yes.
Okay, Michelle.
I think I sort of addressed this in a prior question, but yes, I support increasing the renewable portfolio standard by at least 3% annually. I'd like to see us go further. I think we need to be more aggressive on that.
Great, and Matthew, please.
I am absolutely in favor of increasing that. I think the Senate bill at 3% is a start. I don't think it goes nearly far enough. We used to be a national leader in this regard, and we've fallen behind, state after state now. States now have 40, 50, 80, I think there's a couple of even 100%, where that's the standard in the renewable portfolio standard. So we've fallen well behind. Again, innovation, that's unacceptable. We need to be the leader. We cannot allow ourselves to keep falling behind. So ideally, yes, I'd like to see 100%, by tomorrow, but I know a lot of environmental groups have been calling for 50% by 2030. If that's what they would recommend to me, then that's what I would be in favor of. So we need to step this up. It'll help for employment, it'll help the environment. It's an easy call.
Thank you, and Marianne, please.
Yes, and again, we're going to be working in a series of interim steps. Anything that, yes, increasing the renewable portfolio standard to 3% will get us started.
Thank you. This next question is going to be directed to Michelle. 3.4% of Massachusetts children have elevated levels of lead in their blood. What actions will you take to reduce our children's exposure to lead poisoning from lead paint and in our water? Would you work to strengthen public disclosure requirements for toxic substances used by companies in our communities and in the products that we buy?
So the lead levels are unacceptable, and we need to address it from a number of different ways. Part of the lead is getting into some of the children by the pipes that are in older homes and in the streets. So we actually need to invest locally and at our municipal level to upgrade the water pipe infrastructure. But we also probably need to do greater inspections, especially for rental homes where there will be children and low and moderate income children in those residences to make sure that lead is removed before children occupy those spaces. So it's unacceptable to have kids ingesting either water or lead paint that is affecting their lifelong health. So we need to be more assertive in removing lead in the environment.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
It is unacceptable that there is still lead. I have two young children, a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. It hits home when you hear things like that. We had lead in our house. Well, we dealt with it. We were lucky enough to be able to deal with it and afford to be able to deal with it. We need to make sure everybody can afford to deal with lead that they find in their homes. Again, that's a personal importance to me. Okay? I agree with the pipes. We certainly need to be addressing that. We need those inspections. We need audits when homes are sold. That should be factored into the price of a house for many people. Does it have lead paint? Are you going to have children? In terms of sort of toxic chemicals and the like, I know that there are efforts for, to reduce toxins in a lot of the environment and in this stuff. So, there's House Bill 2913 and Senate 426 that are both relative to environmental justice and toxic reduction in the Commonwealth. Well, these will take steps to remove these toxins from things that children are around, and will help firefighters in these communities as well, because these particles enter the air. When fires go up, fire retardants don't work the way they're supposed to.
Thank you. And William, please.
This is one of those kind of issues for me where I believe you can test and find the source. If there's chemical pollutants in the water like lead, there's a source. We need to have much more testing. We all know what happened in Flint and what was allowed to happen there. I suspect it wouldn't happen here, but you can never be too careful. So the first thing would be more testing. Let's find out what the source is. We can also expand things like lead abatement programs, and those are things that I would be in favor of.
Thank you. And Marianne, please.
mean, it's not enough to, I mean, those numbers are bad enough to be outraged about this situation. But that's not really where the outrage should end. And it's really around all of the implications of people who are sitting in the State House in leadership positions who are charged with telling our stories. What happens when we don't have people in those rooms who are helping to create these complex and nuanced stories, comprehensive stories, and these are our lives. I think, yes, public disclosure, yes to everything that is going to move leadership in the House to help us take action that makes a difference in people's lives.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving to lightning round now, which is the 30-second answer. So I'm going to start with Michelle. Would you support House Bill 3281 that calls for fossil fuel divestment of Massachusetts pension funds?
Yes, definitely. We had a similar measure in Lexington Town Meeting as well, and I supported that.
Great, Matthew.
Yes.
Okay, Marianne.
Yes.
And William.
Yes.
Great. Okay, 2 summers ago, 90% of Massachusetts was experiencing, oh, this is for Marianne, sorry. 2 summers ago, 90% of Massachusetts was experiencing severe or extreme drought conditions. What steps would you propose that Massachusetts take to conserve water usage in the event of severe or extreme drought?
Well, I guess some of the typical things, I'm not really up to speed on all of this, but we could obviously not be watering our lawns as much. There are a lot of green lawns around town. I think we're just going to have to go, I don't know the answer, actually.
Okay, next, Matthew, please.
I do think a ban on watering lawns and those types of conditions makes sense. I would agree. I think the issue is broader. However, that really part of the reason we have these droughts is that we don't have enough water. A lot of the water hits buildings, which interfere, or pavement, and it interferes with the natural rain cycle. So we need, here it is again, innovation, in order to make sure that we have new technologies and new ways of dealing with this. And there are many that exist. I'd be happy to talk about any of them afterwards, but I know my time is about to expire, and there it is. So.
Great. Michelle, please.
This really needs more time, but when in Hudson, when I was the assistant town administrator, I helped to develop a progressive system for responding to droughts that help to conserve water. So systems like that are available, and I would expand them. We also need to do infiltration and groundwater recharge by making sure that the design and construction of our buildings puts more water back down into the ground so we have fewer droughts. And using best management practices will help to achieve that.
Thank you. And William, please.
Yeah, we need to take a look at our water aquifers and understand what type of groundwater resources are available to us. My understanding is that they're kind of reasonable in Massachusetts. We certainly don't suffer the way other parts of the country do. I can tell you out there, they're looking at things like desalinization as a key part of what they need to do. I'm not sure that we're at that point yet, but if we were to have sustained 90% drought levels, clearly that's what you're going to have to look at.
Okay, this next one is directed to Matthew. A recent study found that reducing our consumption of meat and dairy products is the single biggest environmental impact we can have, not just for reducing greenhouse gases, but deforestation, biodiversity, and water quality. What role can the Massachusetts legislature play in encouraging a transition to a lower food carbon footprint?
I think it'll be hard to get people to give up eating meat. I think we should certainly encourage people through public health campaigns to note that this is both an environmental and a win for you yourself. I think urban agriculture can be a very useful tool in this. It's great for the long term. If we teach kids more about food, they'll get involved in growing it and preparing it. They'll be more likely to eat healthy when they grow up, less likely to eat meat. And the long-term benefits will be huge to both the environment and to public health. So it's sort of a dual benefit. I know the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources is working on that, so we need to fund that.
Thank you. Michelle, please.
So the Magic subregion was one of the first parts of the state to do a food policy plan, and we followed that up at MAPC, taking the lead on the statewide food policy plan. And there are a number of recommendations about having more local agricultural, free-range animals to reduce the amount of water that goes into and the feed, et cetera. I have almost no time left, so I support urban agriculture as well.
Thank you. William, please.
Yeah, I believe this is an education issue. I mean, just to be clear, I'm not sure that I would be supportive of legislation that would prevent people consuming meat and dairy. But the food pyramid that I grew up with, and yeah, that gray hair is real, is really out of date. And so there is a very clear educational opportunity here that we can take to just educate people about what they should eat and what's good for their bodies. And then I think when that adjustment occurs, the rest of it will take care of itself.
Thank you. And Mary Ann, please.
Yes to education. And again, it's a kind of ethos that each person has to pick up for themselves. I think it's behavior modification is a big part of climate change. It's an individual level, what we are going to do that's going to make a difference in our communities and in our lives.
Thank you. Okay, this question is directed to William. Many politicians consider only the costs of addressing climate change. Will you work to ensure that the House weighs both the costs and benefits of taking action on climate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am one of those persons that tends to think economically about most things. But there is a benefit to a lot of what we're talking about. There's health benefits. And just to be clear, they can be accounted for. The health benefits of not having particulates being inhaled into your lungs is quantifiable. The last number that I heard was somewhere on the order of approaching $875 billion with a B dollars for the United States. So I think we can absolutely talk about benefits, and it's probably long overdue that we focus on it more.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
I think we need to look at the long-term implications of our decision-making, and even if it costs more in the short term, we need to make the hard choices now to make sure that our buildings are more energy efficient, and we're making choices that set us on a path to greater sustainability. And I would agree with Bill, health impact assessments and other things along those lines can be quantified, and there is a cost of inaction that is far greater than the momentary short-term costs.
Thank you very much. Matthew, please.
I think we need to do a lot more stressing of the positive. There are massive benefits to health. There are massive benefits to the economy in doing this. Progress on the environment can lead to economic development. Building new solar panels, installing solar panels, those are jobs. These are benefits of this type of system. We need to do this around the Commonwealth. Clean energy jobs alone have generated over 100,000 jobs in Massachusetts. There's no trade-off here. We need to be focused on those benefits. Ecotourism and open space can draw people into your town to spend money.
Thank you very much. Mary Ann, please.
We have to do everything possible. This is the only place in the universe that we're going to be able to live and to continue to prosper and share our lives with other people and people we care about. We have to do everything we can to protect our planet and to bring us back from the brink of climate disaster.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the audience now, even though there's still more questions on this, because you guys worked to actually submit them to us, so they should be heard. So this one is going to be directed to Mary Ann. What experiences do you have, or have you had, that helped you make good decisions for climate change and environmental policy?
And how much time do we have on this?
30 seconds.
Okay, so I've been an activist for more than 20 years. Everything possible to improve revenue, that we can improve our revenue picture, because if you think about that, you know that we are underfunding everything because of decisions that were made more than 20 years ago. So I'll just start with the revenue picture.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
I worked in the State House. I was there over 7 years as a research and budget director. I know how to do this job. I know how to be effective from the start. I have drafted and passed major legislation. I formed coalitions with people from the speaker's office to the governor's office under Democrats and Republicans. And you know, the environment, if you look outside and you can't see why the environment's so important, look at the sunrise. We went to Glacier National Park recently. If you can't see the beauty and the importance of protecting that, I mean, I don't know. Makes it critical.
Thank you, and Michelle, please.
So in my 20 years working for the town of Hudson, I was able to build a number of clean energy projects, including a geothermal system in the senior center and a water recirculation system at a splash park. I helped author the town master plan that had a sustainability, energy, and environmental component ahead of its time and won an award for all of that work. Being a Lexington selectman is another great experience, working with all of you and the more than 17 organizations in town that help us to make good decisions on energy and the environment is very clear experience.
Great, thank you. And William? Sorry.
No problem. So when I worked on Beacon Hill a number of years ago, we were able to get the Brownsfields legislation passed. What that really meant was it gave a path towards taking uneconomic industrial waste sites, basically, and turning them back into productive economic use. And the thing that is, and as rewarding as that was, the thing that I learned, it is a lot better to not make a mess than it is to clean it up. So all of my energy is directed now at preventing the mess from happening, and you'll find me a very zealous advocate on that behalf.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to move to our last question of the evening before we do the closing statements. 30 seconds, starting with William. What's your position on developing nuclear power in and around New England?
Well, folks, you know, I go back and forth. It may be a necessary energy source that we need to look at, and so I'll tell you, I go back and forth. It may have a role. I don't know. It may have a role going forward, so that's my position on nuclear.
Thank you. And Michelle?
I'm opposed to expanding any additional nuclear power in New England or anywhere in the Commonwealth. I think the byproducts of nuclear energy are just too toxic and unsafe, and we don't want them in the environment in storage into perpetuity. But I think we have other options. Microgrids and modernizing the grid and wind will get us where we need to go.
Thank you. And Matthew, please.
I too oppose nuclear energy. I don't see that it's the future. We've tried that. We've seen the disasters. Think of Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island here in the United States. We've all been exposed to some of that radiation. We shouldn't be pursuing nuclear. There's time for innovation, and that time is now. We need to be looking at the new ways to do things, not going back to the same old things that have been tried and failed over and over again. We need new leadership, new innovation.
Thank you. And Mary Ann, please.
I'm also opposed.
Thank you. So now is the last question of our night, and then we're going to have closing statements. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we go. This one is going to be directed to Matthew, and you're going to be, I think you're pretty familiar with this. Our legislature operates on a slow, deliberate, 2-year cycle, controlled by the Speaker, where most legislation is passed at the end of the session every 2 years. What would you do to ensure that the legislature takes rapid action to respond to the urgency of our climate crisis?
30 seconds, okay. Well, the number one thing you want to do is build coalitions. You got to figure out exactly what needs to be done, and I do have 7 years of experience, over 7 years of experience doing just that at the legislature. Identify the problem, identify the solution, build your coalition. But if you want to be successful, you got to know how to work with the Speaker and the leadership team, and that is not always an easy thing to do. I have a long track record of working with the Speaker to find compromise and to find the ways forward at the State House.
Thank you. Mary Ann, please.
This is a key piece because I think this is what this election is about. It's about people want representatives in the State House who are going to push leadership to do the right things. We want people who are going to push leadership to stand up to the national government, federal government. I will build coalitions. That's what I've been doing for 20 plus years. And that is power. And I'll bring that into the State House and work with all of you outside of the State House, and we'll work together.
Thank you. William, please.
You know, people all over the Commonwealth are doing what we're doing here tonight, having very similar discussion. So I actually think that the environment, clean energy, these are unifying issues. We saw it with the Senate. They took all the bills that they could, they put them together. Now they're going to go and put pressure on the House. So, in my opinion, that I actually think this is one of the environment is the unifying issue, because most of the issues are highly, highly divisive. So I do think that we have the benefit here of this being an issue that's a unifier that's going to push us together.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
In addition to my work with MAPC, I also served for 3 years on the Mass Municipal Association Board with many mayors, city councilors, and boards of selectmen across the Commonwealth. All my projects in Hudson required me to work with most of the state agencies in Massachusetts. I have relationships with people throughout the State House, the state agencies, and our elected officials throughout the Commonwealth. You use those coalitions, those relationships to demand action, to demand change, and you collaborate with those individuals to make sure that your voice is being heard.
Thank you very much, all the candidates. So we are going to ask you, this is now a question that is going to be the answer will be their closing statement. It's closing remarks. It's for 2 minutes, and they haven't been told this question beforehand. So 2 minutes off the cuff to end the quiz. Okay, I'm going to start with William. Speaking from the heart, tell us about your commitment to addressing the climate crisis in your personal life, and will you take a leadership role in the House on this important issue if you are elected?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, you know, we can talk about this being the only role we're ever going to have. We can, and I get that sort of sentiment. Here's where the rubber meets the road for me. Again, I'm a very economically sort of centered and motivated person. I think this is the future for us. I think that we could talk about the ills of fossil fuel, and I'd be happy to do that all night long, but then you're going to have to give me the next night so we can talk about all the benefits that we're going to get by moving forward with a clean energy, in a sustainable future. I think that's the bottom line for me, is that I fully believe and I fully expect that you folks getting here tonight, sending the right person to the legislature, changing the direction of things that we're doing here in Massachusetts. And one of the reasons I'm running for the legislature is I believe that Massachusetts can lead on this and a number of important issues. So my heart is in this 100%. I think it's the only way for us to go forward. I do believe that there is a giant bubble that is going to burst for the petrochemical company, and I don't want to be anywhere near it when it bursts. I want us building wind, I want us having renewable energy, I want us all to have our own power so that when the hurricanes hit and the power lines go down, we all have access to the comforts that we need in a way that we can determine and in a way that we have oversight, because we're the final arbiters of how we should live our lives and how these kind of things should work. And I truly believe that individuals, when given the choice between should we go do something that's going to pollute and give us asthma and make us sick and kill the fish and do the rest, right? No one's going to make that decision. But when that decision is being made from far away or on high, that's a very easy decision to make, right? Do you think someone in Chicago cares if the fish are dying in Massachusetts? Absolutely not, right? Especially if they have that type of position of power. So that's where my passion lies, and this is just one sort of aspect of it, but I fully look forward to being a passionate advocate on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne, please.
Could you just repeat that, please?
Sure. Speaking from the heart, tell us about your commitment to addressing the climate crisis in your personal life. And will you take a leadership role in the House on this important issue if you are elected?
Thank you. So some of you already know that I spent my 20s living in a Korean Zen monastery. And that was an experience that also created a sense of not just community, but a sense of responsibility for how we live our lives. And so I think on a very personal level, I bring a very strong commitment to responsibility and to climate change, the environment, and our energy issues. So we have been composting for 30 years, I guess, and we have fruit trees and little vegetable gardens around our house. We live in a very small house, not the giant kinds of homes you see in lots of places. We moved into a small home. We kept it small, and we've been trying to reduce our footprint for every year. And we do not eat a lot of meat. That was something we learned in the monastery. We basically lived a vegetarian diet during the week, and then once a week we would have meat. So we continue that practice as well. I think that, yes, I will pursue leadership roles to bring all of us together to improve our environment, to elevate our energy, and really address climate change in productive ways. I will be your champion, but you will have to work with me. I don't have all the ideas, and frankly, I think you guys have way more ideas than any of us do. And I think it's very important that we maintain that relationship as we go forward, because this is a critical moment in our planet's history, in our own development for the future, and it's incumbent upon all of us that we continue to work together.
Thank you. Matthew.
As I noted in my opening, this is something that matters to me on the personal level. We teach our kids at home to treat the environment with respect. We take care of neighborhood animals that we see out. We go out of our way to engage in urban and local food growing in our own backyard, in our own homes. We've made a solid commitment to never invest in companies that will harm the environment for any reason. And, we're strong supporters of these types of things. And, this is an issue that is at the top of my list of priorities. Fighting for the environment is a central component of my platform, and I would love to go to the State House and be a leader on this issue. I will go looking to stand up for what's right. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm looking for a solution. That's my goal as I go about doing this. And, I too would want to work with everybody in this room. The only way that we can find the way forward is by working together. It's been the core of my campaign, is I want to talk to you. That remains equally true on this issue. There is nothing more important as a state representative than actually representing, which means reaching out to people and talking. And in the end, I want this job because I want to work for you. And I'm committed to improving life for all residents in this great Commonwealth. And I believe I am the candidate with the most relevant experience, the proven ability to think outside the box, and the passion to get this job done right, including on the environment, and to do all of that from day one. And I promise that I will always strive, if I am elected, to make your lives better. And I promise to keep working hard to earn your vote on September 4th. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
I lie in bed at night awake worrying about the climate crisis. It's so pressing on my mind that much of my mental energy is expended in devising ways and creative ideas that we can address this. It's one of the reasons why I've spent so much of my career working on the transportation sector. Some people know that I was the initiator of the statewide Complete Streets program, the legislation that passed and is helping incentivize cities and towns to build safer bike and pedestrian facilities. I'm very proud of that and was proud to bring that program here to Lexington as well. On a personal level, everything I do is through the lens of environmental sustainability. I have a vegetable garden. I compost religiously. I recycle everything. I have 38 solar panels on my house. I drive a hybrid. I have upgraded all the insulation in my house, done my home energy audit, just like all of the rest of you, just about everything I could possibly think of to make sure that I am doing my personal best and making sure I lower my carbon footprint, reducing the amount of meat I eat, et cetera, et cetera. This is so pressing that every one of us has to take personal responsibility, and we have to fight for better legislation at the state and federal level. You all are my partners in this. You all are the experts. You know more about this than I do, and I am so privileged as your selectman to have been the beneficiary of your great ideas and your enthusiasm and passion for the work that we've been able to do here in Lexington. We are a leader in Lexington, and one of the things that excites me tremendously is the opportunity to bring that leadership to the state level and make sure that we advance our climate action at a more rapid pace than is happening now. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to have a bigger voice on Beacon Hill, and I will be your champion on the environment.
Thank you. Well, so that closes out tonight's forum. I just want to say, my name is Deb Pasternak. I'm from the Massachusetts Sierra Club. It has been a complete pleasure and honor to moderate this. You Lexington people are very lucky that you are so engaged and have such great candidates that understand the urgency of these issues. I really want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank you all for knowing so much and being so great under pressure, and thank Mark for inviting me to be the moderator. Good night.